Hanna-Barbera, one of the most influential studios in the world of animation. They were the first to truly focus their cartoons for television and left all of the competition in the dust. There was even a time during the 1970s where they controlled almost 80% of children's programming and 2/3 of the Saturday morning block. Hanna-Barbera is also responsible for providing some of the most iconic cartoon characters of all time. Scooby-Doo, Yogi Bear, the Flintstones, the Jetsons, the Smurfs, and the list goes on and on. There was no doubt that they were the undisputed kings of televised animation, but for some reason, it all came crumbling down. They went from being the largest player in the game to being just another subsidiary. It was a fall from grace of epic proportions, and it leaves us asking one question. How? How did this titan of the industry fail when it commanded almost 80% of it? And what exactly brought them to their knees? Well, there's a lot more to it than you think. So let's find out what ruined Hanna-Barbera. Our story begins back in the 1930s. It was an age of theatrical shorts and was well before the creation of the television. If you wanted to see cartoons, you had to go to the movie theaters. There, you would see Mickey Mouse, Betty Boop, Popeye, the Looney Tunes, and many other characters. This was an excellent place for the growth of future talent, and that included William Hanna, aka Bill, and Joseph Barbera, aka Joe. They both met while working together at the animation division of MGM Studio. In 1939, they worked together on a short that was called Puss Gets the Boot. Look familiar? This short would serve as the future basis for Tom and Jerry, two of the most iconic cartoon characters of all time. Here's a fun fact. The sound effect for Tom's yell was actually recorded by Bill Hanna. Bill and Joe would go on to produce Tom and Jerry shorts for over 20 years, and were even nominated for 12 Oscars, of which they won 7. But Tom and Jerry was just the beginning for these two, as they would grow more industrious and pursue other goals. In 1955, Bill and Joe became the head producers of MGM Animation, though this would only be for a little while. In 1957, MGM closed down their animation studio, believing that they had enough backlog content for the foreseeable future. Fortunately for William and Joe, they were able to land on their feet and were given an offer by film director George Sidney. He said he would be their business partner and convinced Screen Gems, a television production subsidiary of Columbia Pictures, to make them a deal. Because of this, they were able to create HB Enterprises, and it would become the first major animation studio to provide cartoons for television. The first show to come from HB Enterprises was The Ruff and Teddy Show in December of 1957. It aired on NBC and was semi-successful, but the following show would blow it out of the water.
Everybody's a star on the Huckleberry Hound Show, so let's go!
The Huckleberry Hound Show came out in 1958 and was the first big hit for Bill and Joe. It premiered in syndication and aired right before prime time in most markets. It also introduced Yogi Bear, who went on to get his own cartoon in 1961. Also, Huckleberry was the first show to ever win an Emmy for Outstanding Kids Program. Joe and Bill had finally found their momentum, and they ran with it.
Aw, shucks, folks.
In 1959, they decided to change the name of their company to Hanna-Barbera Productions. And the year after that, one of the most iconic families in animation history arrived, and they went by the name of the Flintstones. This was the first animated show to gain a primetime slot. It was also the first animated sitcom, though it's no surprise that it took inspiration from The Honeymooners. As a matter of fact, Jack Gleason almost sued Hanna-Barbera, but decided against it. He said that he didn't want to be known as, quote, the guy who yanked Fred Flintstone off the air.
Winston is the one filter cigarette that delivers flavor 20 times a pack. Winston's got that filter blend. Yeah, Fred.
The Flintstones would hold the title of longest-running animated primetime show for over 35 years, but that was eventually surpassed by The Simpsons in 1996. Considering that they were the first ones to do it, and held it for so long, that's still a respectable record. There were quite a few shows that Hanna-Barbera launched during the 1960s. Johnny Quest, The Jetsons, Yogi Bear, and Top Cat, to name a few. Hanna-Barbera was cranking out cartoons left and right. So many cartoons. But there was one show that came out during this decade that would become their golden ticket. In 1969, there was Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? And it was a massive hit for Hanna-Barbera. This show would go on to redefine their content, as they discovered a formula for creating cartoons. All you would need are a bunch of teens, a wacky sidekick, and some kind of crazy adventure. And Hanna-Barbera went nuts making clones of Scooby-Doo.
It's Goober and the Ghost Chasers, guest starring the Partridge Kid.
The 1970s would prove to be an amazing decade for Hanna-Barbera. They controlled over 80% of children's programming, and 2/3 of the cartoons that would air on Saturday mornings. No other studios could ever come close to their levels of success, and for good reason too. A big part of Hanna-Barbera's success was how they streamlined the production of their cartoons. It's no secret that high-quality animation is very expensive and also very time-consuming. How could one possibly provide animated content for something as demanding as television? That's a big reason why Disney backed out of televised animation when it was first launched. They saw it as way too demanding, both in production and cost. But for Hanna-Barbera, they were able to come up with a solution, one that would give them a huge advantage, and it's called limited animation. It's cheap, it's fast, and it can be reused over and over and over.
It feels like we've been on this same stretch of road forever. Look, there it is again.
There's what, Dee Dee?
That pile of rocks. We keep passing it. There it is again. And again.
No, Dee Dee, that's called a repeat pan. First implemented by William Hanna and Joseph Barbera in 1947 to streamline production costs.
This was a method to cut back on cost in a big way. Whether it's reusing same backgrounds, cutting down on in-between frames, or reusing the same frames. Funny enough, this used to be a stylistic choice before it became a method for cutting down on cost. UPA was initially known for it, but Hanna-Barbera used it to save lots of money, and it was one of the main reasons why they were able to dominate the industry. Chuck Jones, one of the legendary animators of old, was not too fond of it, and called Hanna-Barbera Illustrated Radio. They were also nicknamed the General Motors of animation, due to their assembly line style of making cartoons.
From the idea and the story, we then move into layout. Now, layout is where we take these drawings, sketch them up larger so that the artist can work on them and begin to move the characters around.
Like I already said, Hanna-Barbera was dominating the 1970s, and very few studios could compete with them on television. Filmation was one of their few competitors, but it flopped with its show Uncle Croc's Block. After that, ABC severed ties with Filmation and began commissioning its entire Saturday morning to Hanna-Barbera. Now, Hanna-Barbera focused mainly on television, but they did work on the occasional theatrical film. In 1973, Charlotte's Web came out, and it had mixed reviews. Some people loved it, other people hated it, and that also included the original author of the story, E.B. White. He said, quote, "We have never ceased to regret that our version of Charlotte's Web never got made. The Hanna-Barbera version has never pleased either of us. A travesty."
This is the most terrible case of injustice I ever heard of.
Regardless of the ups and downs, Hanna-Barbera remained the king of the televised animation industry. Their methods had put them on top, and they were able to hold that position for decades. But change was on the horizon. Television was about to go through another transformation, and Hanna-Barbera would soon face a new type of competition. The 1980s would be a turbulent time for Hanna-Barbera. Up to this point, they were essentially unchallenged, and very few could hope to stand up to them, and those that did were not very successful. But a new era of cartoons were on the way. Welcome to the world of animated licensed properties. G.I. Joe, My Little Pony, Transformers, He-Man, Thundercats, TMNT, and the list goes on. This was a game changer for televised animation. What better way to sell toys to children than putting advertisements directly in cartoons? Yeah, this was ethically questionable, but it also proved to be very profitable.
G.I. Joe Air Defense, G.I. Joe Checkpoint, Cobra Bunker, and Joe and Dreadnoks figures each sold separately from Hasbro.
Along with this change came another that would alter the landscape of animated television forever. And that was the airing of cartoons outside of Saturday morning. Up to this point, if you wanted to watch cartoons, you had to make time in your schedule. There was a rise of syndicated cartoons, and more channels were airing them on weekdays and not just on Saturday morning. There were now more time slots to fill, and TV networks went to studios such as Deke, Marvel, and Sunbow. After many, many years, Hanna-Barbera had finally met their match. Now, Hanna-Barbera wasn't completely defeated during this era. They still had a few tricks up their sleeve, and one of them came in the form of tiny blue people.
There was a hidden village where tiny creatures lived. They called themselves Smurfs. They were good.
The Smurfs came out in 1981 and was a big hit for Hanna-Barbera. It ran for 9 seasons and was the longest-running Saturday morning show in history, with a whopping 256 episodes. Outside of the Smurfs, Hanna-Barbera produced other shows to try and stay relevant, but none of them could really stack up against this new wave of animated licensed properties. Their control over the market was slipping, as it dropped from 80% to 20%.
Did you have a tough day, dear?
Yes.
The end of the 1980s and the early 90s remained tough for the company. There was also this bizarre wave of cartoons that were younger versions of classic characters, such as the Flintstone Kids, Tom and Jerry Kids, Popeye and Son, and a pup named Scooby-Doo. And to be fair, this one was actually good, but it still wasn't enough to bring Hanna-Barbera back from the edge. There was also Pirates of Darkwater, which was really cool, but also there was Yo Yogi, which was really bad.
Yo, 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 Yogi, Yogi's here with all of the old crew.
The 1990s proved to be an interesting time for Hanna-Barbera. The company went through some pretty big changes and was acquired by Turner Broadcasting and the Apollo Investment Fund for $320 million. For those who don't know, Ted Turner was on a quest around this time to acquire a majority of cartoons for his new television channel, one that would air animated shows 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it went by the name of Cartoon Network.
Okay, places! Quite understand. All right. How do I look?
Fred!
Come on, Olive. Ready?
Ready. Take it from the top.
Okay, boys. 1, 2.
Cartoon Network was launched in October of 1992 and had a massive backlog of Hanna-Barbera shows. It was a new era for the company, as they were now airing their old content on cable. In 1993, Ted Turner bought the remaining Hanna-Barbera properties from Apollo Investment and was now the sole owner of the company and all of its cartoons. This was a step in the right direction for Hanna-Barbera. They needed to shake things up, and along with this change came new leadership. Fred Seibert, a former executive for MTV, was hired as the new president for Hanna-Barbera, and he had some big plans in store. First off, they needed to hire new artists. A good chunk of the old animators had left Hanna-Barbera, so there was now a gap to fill. But this was an opportunity to bring in some fresh talent, to hire people who had ideas to shake up the scene. Some really big names got their start at Hanna-Barbera around this time, Craig McCracken, Genndy Tartakovsky, Seth MacFarlane, Butch Hartman, and many others. I was actually able to reach out to Fred with some questions, and he was kind enough to answer. I asked him what his plans were for Hanna-Barbera when he first was put in charge. He said that he wanted to return back to cartoons, that the studio had strayed too far away over the years from making funny cartoons and instead focused too much on animated sitcoms. So it was his goal to get Hanna-Barbera back to their roots, and that's exactly what he did. This new wave of talent was hungry to make good cartoons, to shake up the formula with ideas that were outside of the box. Plus, all of these shows had a brand new home on Cartoon Network, and they were very popular. There was Dexter's Lab in 1995, Johnny Bravo, I Am Weasel, and Cow and Chicken in 1997, and then there was Powerpuff Girls in 1998. The majority of them performed extremely well and were the crown jewels of Cartoon Network. They were even given a special name, Cartoon Cartoons.
Cartoon, I think you'll see, is the most unequivocally doubly named thing on TV. Don't you agree? Don't you agree? Like we're in a mumu. Yes.
With a tutu!
Yes. That's a no-no.
Or a lulu!
Baboon, baboon. Enough!
Hey, cartoon!
Ted Turner pushed Hanna-Barbera to produce content exclusively for Cartoon Network, such as SWAT Cats and Two Stupid Dogs. By proxy, this meant the end of airing on broadcast television. Funny enough, the last cartoon from Hanna-Barbera to air on broadcast network was the Dumb and Dumber Show, 'cause that was a thing. But now we approach the end of our story. Hanna-Barbera might have been able to find a home on Cartoon Network and find success with their new programming, but it ultimately wouldn't be enough. In 1998, Hanna-Barbera was absorbed into Warner Brothers Animation and was relocated to their studio in Sherman Oaks, California. Because of this change, Hanna-Barbera had to relinquish all of the shows it was producing over to Cartoon Network Studios. After decades of massive success, Hanna-Barbera had finally run out of steam and was a shadow of their former self. Hanna-Barbera is a studio unlike any other. They saw an opportunity with televised animation, and they were able to rule that market with an iron fist. They created iconic cartoon characters that are known throughout the world and set many records along the way. But despite their best efforts to change with the times, it ultimately was not enough. From animated licensed properties to the rise of weekday syndicated cartoons, the landscape of television changed rapidly during the 80s and 90s and loosened the grip that Hanna-Barbera had on animated television. Yes, it was able to find a home on Cartoon Network and was able to pump out a handful of incredible shows during that time, but it was too little, too late. Warner Brothers was their final destination, and that is where they remain to this day. To their credit, Warner still produces content that focuses on the old Hanna-Barbera properties. There's the occasional reboot with Scooby-Doo and Tom and Jerry, but they never last for too long. There's also this bizarre trend of combining Hanna-Barbera characters alongside WWE wrestlers. Now, there's the rumor of a Hanna-Barbera cinematic universe in the works over at Warner, but this remains to be seen. I'm not sure how well that would be received, but it's supposed to happen by 2020 with a new Scooby-Doo film. But for William Hanna and Joseph Barbera, they both kept working for their studio all the way up to their deaths. Bill Hanna died of throat cancer in 2001, and Joe Barbera died a few years later in 2006. The last thing he worked on was a Tom and Jerry short called The Karate Guard in 2005. Even though their content was low budget and low quality, one cannot deny the impact Hanna-Barbera has left on the animation industry. Their cartoons and characters are loved by millions across the globe and are still praised to this very day. They inspired artists to pursue their own ideas and even hired some of them to work at their studio. And some of those people have gone on to create great things and continue to inspire future generations. Hanna-Barbera was truly the father of televised animation, and even though they are essentially gone, we owe them our gratitude for paving the way for animation history.